It's arguably the biggest 2-week stretch in the recruiting calendar for Tennessee football every single year. It starts this weekend. It goes through next weekend. Tons and tons of highly rated, highly touted prospects. We're talking highly rated 4 stars and even 5 stars are going to be on campus for OVs. What does Tennessee need to do to put more fish in the bowl? That's coming up next here on a Friday Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's good, everybody? Happy Friday morning and welcome into Locked On Vols. It is your team, your place, part of the Locked On Podcast Network every single day, 30 minutes or less. I'm your host, Eric Kane. Appreciate you for being a part of the show here today. We got a fun show coming up. A couple of guests are going to get us set for Monster Weekends. First, Matt Ray, my colleague over at VolQuest.com. He's going to set the scene for who's going to be on campus and which guys Tennessee's in the best spot for, plus recap a recruiting commitment from earlier in the week and some of those top prospects that are still available. Matt Ray is going to join us here for segments 1 and 2 of VolQuest.com. Then from WarChant.com in segment number 3, we have Aslan Hajivandi is going to join us and get us set for Tennessee and Florida State coming up later tonight to kick off College World Series action. All that and more right here on Locked On Vols. You can subscribe to us for free, download us for free, listen to us for free wherever you get your podcasts. And thanks so much, you everydayers, for making Locked On Vols your first listen. Without further ado, let's bring on to the show Matt Ray to get us set for just a huge recruiting weekend for the Tennessee Volunteers. Matt, I said kind of leading into the show that this is the biggest 2-week stretch on the recruiting calendar for Tennessee this year, obviously. I mean, we're looking at right now on paper. We'll see if they all make it in, but probably close to it. 25 official visitors this weekend. All right, the headliner, probably the one everybody's going to be talking about. Let's start with him, David Sanders, offensive tackle. He has been to campus so many times, but this is his official. What needs to happen for Tennessee to lock this one down?
Yeah, let's go back to your first point, then we'll jump right to David Sanders. But I think this is probably the largest official visit weekend in Tennessee football history. I mean, if these guys make it in and you get to around that 25 number, just in terms of the sheer number, it's going to be, probably the largest official visit weekend in Tennessee history. And then you start looking at the talent that will run through. It's a massive weekend. It starts with David Sanders. There's no doubt that he's the headliner. But, I think David Sanders has been here 3 times already this calendar year. This is number 4. And like I said, this is an official visit. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Tennessee has to continue to build on that comfort level that he has here. David Sanders has seen pretty much everything that Knoxville has to show. He's seen everything that Tennessee does from a, pregame standpoint, game day atmosphere, being around the team, being around the players. This weekend for David Sanders, it's going to be about being a recruit, being around guys like George McIntyre, just spending time and knowing as he stays 3 days and gets everything, put in front of him one more time, knowing that this is where he can be. So it's going to be reassurances and reinforcements. Tennessee comes into this weekend, we continue to feel like in a good spot for David Sanders. It's, he's the top offensive tackle in the country, and it's going to be no late at. He's going to see Ohio State later in the month, and the Buckeyes are very much in the thick of it, and Georgia's hung around as well. So, we'll see, when David Sanders makes a decision. But to this point, and this is, if you're Tennessee, this is what you want. To this point, you have put your best foot forward. You've continued to remain right at the top of this thing. And, this weekend they've got to continue to build on that momentum and get this one to the finish line.
Other offensive line prospects scheduled to be in: Juan Gaston, Jacoby Ward, and Dontrell Glover. But I want to talk about some wideouts. And it feels like, tell me when I'm wrong here, I often am, but Tennessee's playing catch-up, obviously, with 5 stars. Going to take big swings at him this weekend. Caleb Cunningham, Jaime Ffrench, commit Joakim Dotson's going to be in. But how big of a weekend is this to, play catch-up, or what can Tennessee do to try to get back in the races of Ffrench and Cunningham?
Well, I think the races for both of those guys have been somewhat interesting. They've both visited Tennessee a handful of times, and they've both had rave reviews every time they left. But I think with Jaime Ffrench, everybody had Jaime Ffrench pegged to Ohio State for months. And then suddenly it got into the spring. Folks were by the school. He made his own visits. And Texas is in this thing. LSU's in this thing. Tennessee was at one point in his top three, and then that changed a week later. So Jaime Ffrench, as he's seen these official visits and things have bounced around, I think he really goes in depth in those visits. I think he looks at a variety of things, and his leaderboard kind of shifts around a little bit. So Tennessee's got their chance this weekend with Jaime Ffrench. I don't think Ohio State's not in the top three right now, if you will, but at the end of the day, the Buckeyes very well could end up being right back in this thing as things play out down the stretch. He's got to sit down and really start to cross schools off his list because he's going to have a good time everywhere he goes. He's going to have a good time at Tennessee this weekend. So ultimately, it's just continuing to show Jaime Ffrench what he can do in the offense, how Tennessee sees him developing. Being around a guy like George McIntyre is big. I think those two have connected really well throughout the process. They knew each other from when Ffrench was committed to Alabama, and George was taking visits there prior to being committed to Tennessee. Same thing with Caleb Cunningham. He's close with George McIntyre. He's been to Tennessee around George McIntyre. Thinks very highly of him. A lot of people think Caleb Cunningham is not leaving the state of Mississippi. He very well may not, but Auburn and Florida have worked in this one to shake things up. Tennessee has shown well during the visits that he's been here. So where does that one go this weekend? For me right now, Cunningham feels like more of a long shot than Ffrench, but I think you can show well with both of those guys, and I think the football talks are going to be huge this weekend.
Matt, last one on the offensive end, and there are tons on the offensive end that we're not even speaking of right now, but a Chattanooga native, a running back in Chicago Mills Knights, had a previous relationship with Darrell Sims when he was at Cincinnati. Tennessee already has Justin Baker, of course, but would like to add two. How big of a weekend is this for Mills Knight and Tennessee?
Yeah, this is a big weekend for Tennessee and Chicago Mills Knight. Now, his relationship with Darrell Sims goes back for a long while. All the way back to Cincinnati, one of Sims' first calls when he got here. The two have continued to connect. It's been a busy month for Chicago Mills Knight. I swapped texts with him a little bit on Thursday. It's been a busy month. He's worked in unofficial visits. He's worked in official visits. He'll see Tennessee. He's done midweek officials. He'll see Tennessee this weekend, and he'll see Ole Miss to end the month, and we'll see where things go from there. The hope had been that his mom would be able to make it on this official visit with him, and that would have been a big deal. She won't make the trip, but he still will be surrounded by family. He'll have his dad, his aunt, and his uncle in town with him. And, that's going to be big for Chicago Mills Knight. It was big for Chicago Mills Knight to get back to campus when he did at the end of May for 865 Live. It gave him a little bit more of a comfort level leading into those official visits. So this is something for Darrell Sims to build on from that. Ole Miss and Miami, two schools that are heavily involved in this, but Mills Knight has seen Alabama, Auburn, and Michigan, all three this month as well. So this is an important visit for Tennessee. They think very highly of Chicago Mills Knight. They love what they have in Justin Baker. They love what they have in him. The idea of pairing those two together as a Thunder Lightning type package is, very appealing to Tennessee, and it's something that those two have started to talk about a little more. So I think overall, he might not get as mentioned as much, Eric, but Chicago Mills Knight's an important visitor for the Vols this weekend.
That is a look at the offensive side of the maybe 25 official visits set to take place this weekend. We'll take a look at defense coming up next as we continue on here with Matt Ray of VolQuest.com on your Friday Locked On Vols. eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience, the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performances, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money is back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car, turn your car into the MVP, and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Matt, a big group on the defensive line. Of course, you got a defensive line commit earlier this week. We'll speak on here in a moment. But you got Isaiah Gibson, Jared Smith, Zion Grady, Damian Shanklin, all these guys, Charles House, expected to be making their way to campus for OVs. Feels like this is probably the biggest group, maybe not the most important, but the biggest group that might be on campus this weekend.
Yeah, I think so, Eric. I think this may be, it's definitely one of the more important groups. Obviously, The offensive line is essential when you kind of look at what they have, David Sanders and those guys coming in. But this talented group of edge players and guys across the front are, man, it's loaded. I mean, and, starting with Charles House, a guy that Tennessee grabbed momentum for coming out of the winter and really has continued to prioritize for months since. The Vols have been in a good spot for House, but he's taking official visits to Alabama and Georgia, and that's shaking this recruitment up a little bit, but at the end of the day, he's going to be back at Tennessee, and there's a certain comfort level there, and the Vols are going to have to build on that this weekend as he makes a decision on June 22nd. So this visit, when you look at Charles House, as far as making a decision, his is as close as anyone's, at least publicly, for what we're going to do. This is a big visit for Rodney Garner, Josh Heupel, and those guys up front with Charles House as they look to regain that momentum and push towards the finish line with House. But then you've got guys like Jared Smith, Zion Grady, Isaiah Gibson that nobody's really gave Tennessee a shot for, but for whatever reason, they keep coming back to campus, right? And I think when you look at that trio, I think Jared Smith's comments were interesting when he was here for 865 Live. Tennessee is in this more than most people realize, for me, or something along those lines. They've been, up the board for me for some time. He has a good relationship with Jordan Ross. He loves what he's seen from James Pierce, Rodney Garner, Chop. Those guys have done an excellent job of recruiting him. Zion Grady, it's a tougher pull for me with Grady for the Vols right now in terms of what we're looking at there. And, I think Smith's in that tougher pull category too. But Gibson coming back, it'll be his second visit since April. Tennessee's worked that one hard. The more you talk to people, a lot of folks don't see him sticking to his USC commitment and ultimately see him ending up at Georgia. And that very well may be the case. But Tennessee has made up ground significantly in the recruitment of Isaiah Gibson. And the Vols are a contender there heading into the weekend. So it's a big weekend with some guys that Tennessee has prioritized. A lot of folks didn't give them a chance for, and they're going to have a chance to shoot their shot this weekend.
Some other ones, and just kind of mention these guys in passing before my final question to you. A couple of linebackers who are committed elsewhere in the SEC. You got Sanders and Jaden Perlotti and Austin Howard. They're going to be on campus this weekend. Longtime target from the defensive backfield, Timothy Merritt, who recently committed to Miami. He's going to be in this town this weekend. More so than anything, how big is it that these commits are still coming to Tennessee? And it might not mean Tennessee, does anything, but it's a good thing that Tennessee will have an opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, it's big. And I think with Perlotti and Sanders, those are two guys that for William Inge, he honed in on very early once he got the job. But, Sanders was already ready to commit to Alabama essentially by that time and went ahead and pulled the trigger. He had a relationship with that staff dating back to their time at Washington. And, Perlotti has been committed to Georgia for 18 months now. But I think those two guys are two guys that William Inge really likes, really covets. And at the end of the day, to be able to get them here and have a shot at them is, huge. And then you have Austin Howard, the in-state, guy committed to Vanderbilt that Tennessee been keeping tabs on for months. He committed to Vanderbilt and the Vols offered, and now, he's going to be here this weekend, take a deeper look at the program, and we'll see where things continue to go at that position. I talked to Jaden Perlotti earlier in the week, and, he's committed to Georgia, but he's making one final round of visits, and Tennessee has his attention. So a big weekend there for him.
And then lastly, tell me about Tennessee's commit from earlier this week in Jaden Lofton, a guy that's been on campus a ton, feels like a lot of raw talent and ability, and one of these guys that, Rodney Garner can just do wonders with in, a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jaden Lofton's a very intriguing commitment for Tennessee. When you look at him, a guy that was kind of, playing more of a stand-up edge last fall, and at the high school level has added significant weight, measured in at, 250 pounds last weekend, and he's rock solid. I saw him once the visit was over, and he's rock solid and has more to add to his frame. Not a guy that's going to be ready-made once he gets to campus, but has a lot of tools and a lot of natural ability and ability to bend that, like you said, Rodney Garner can do a lot of different things with. A guy that I think flew under the radar a little bit, but when you look at some of the defensive minds that he was being recruited by, from being where he was at up there in New Jersey, it's a really nice addition for Tennessee, a guy with a ceiling, that he's just starting to scratch at. So overall, a nice addition for Tennessee coming out of that first weekend.
And we'll see if any more additions can jump in the boat for the class of 2025. And man, I'm telling you right now, if you love recruiting, if you want to be dialed in on what's going on with Tennessee over the next 2 weekends, no better follow on social media than at Matt_Ray_. And of course, the General's Quarters at VolQuest.com. Austin Price, Matt Ray, Brent Hubb's going to give you the best recruiting coverage imaginable, these always, but over the next 2 weeks specifically. So, Matt, as always, man, I appreciate you for joining the show.
Yeah, Eric, thanks, man.
Okay, guys, we got a final segment left here of this Friday edition of Locked On Vols. Do appreciate you for being here. Again, Tennessee in the College World Series getting going later tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern Time against Florida State. That game can be found on ESPN, and it's a really, really big test to get things going and to tell us all about, give us the skinny on Florida State baseball from warchant.com. Aslan Hajivandi is going to join the show. Good stuff coming up right now. It's going to be a big-time matchup. Tennessee and Florida State, not kicking off the College World Series, but, of course, that game coming up at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on Friday night, the first for each ball club. And, man, it looks like this side of the bracket really, doing more and more research. I mean, all teams are good teams in the College World Series, but these teams in bracket 1, very well-rounded. All these teams can hit. These teams can pitch, and it should be a really, really good show. What are your thoughts on this side of the bracket with Virginia, UNC, Florida State, and Tennessee?
As a Florida State fan, or rather alum, covering it, Big J, journalist, being professional, Eric, glad to see Florida's on the other side of the bracket. But other than wanting to avoid Florida, I think you kind of want to probably avoid Tennessee, but that's what you'll draw in the first game. And I guess maybe it's better off that way because you can throw your ace. We do assume that probably will be starting Jamie Arnold. When we spoke to Link Jarrett before they headed out to Omaha, he said that he looked good in his bullpen session. Everything kind of looks good, so they'll probably go ahead and start Jamie. He just wouldn't be on a full week's rest, which is what they really like to do, but it's a College World Series. But yeah, I mean, the ACC and the SEC, clearly the two best conferences in the country this year. Everybody always knows about the SEC, but man, the ACC is legit this year. There's some really good baseball teams, and Virginia, North Carolina are near the top of that. I mean, I think North Carolina obviously was a higher national seed than Florida State. I think Florida State might just I think Florida State's just a touch above North Carolina, but I certainly know that Florida State's just a cut above Virginia. But all these teams, as you said, so well-rounded, Virginia, North Carolina, they've got bats, and they've got a plethora of arms. And as well as anybody that if you want to get it done in Omaha, you need those guys that were unsung heroes midweek to get you through maybe a rough losers bracket game to kind of keep advancing out there. And all these teams on this side of the bracket seem to have it.
Yeah, no doubt. A lot of pitching here for Florida State. Let's go ahead and start with the ace and Jamie Arnold. And again, recording this before the introductory press conferences at Media Day in Omaha. But the talk is, Link Jarrett kind of hinted to that earlier in the week, that it's going to be Jamie Arnold going Friday night against Tennessee. A sophomore. He is the ace, 11-3, 2.77 ERA. Man, his strikeout to walk ratio is incredible at 155-22. He's logged 100 innings and 2/3. What makes Arnold so effective? And again, if it is Arnold, which we assume it is, you mentioned not a full week's worth of rest. Any limitations for Arnold there?
Wouldn't imagine so. I mean, he threw over 100. I think he might have touched close to 120 against UConn in the Super Regional on Saturday, which was not his best outing of the season by any stretch. They were able to really fight him off. I mean, he got ahead on so many counts and had them down 2 strikes, and they just kept fouling stuff off. And Florida State's infield kind of betrayed him on some situations and had some uncharacteristic errors. But, man, Arnold's got like the 3-pitch mix. He's got the fastball, he's got the changeup, and then his slider is just filthy. The amount of sweep it has on it just really impressive. So And he's also, I say this endearingly, I think he would fit in Knoxville, just with his kind of swagger and his level of confidence. And if you're on the receiving end of an inning-ending punch-out from him, you'll see it in Omaha, the way he struts off the mound. He's got just absolute exudes confidence, and he's got an arsenal of pitches. And Mike Capozzi, the pitching coach for Florida State, has done a really good job of dialing in and figuring out what makes Jaime the most comfortable. They do like keeping him on like a kind of a set schedule and being on a 1 week rest, which is why they had him start the second game of the regional. Carson Dorsey pitched Friday against Stetson. They had Arnold go Saturday in the second game of the regional, and then he pitched the second game of the super regional. But this is the part of the season where you kind of got to make some sacrifice, and that means only 6 days rest, and he's going to have to figure it out on Friday against the Vols.
His fastball sits low to mid-90s, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Tell me a little bit about Carson Dorsey. 7-4, 4.67 ERA. On paper, it's like, oh, well, that's not that impressive. However, really, really established guy coming up from the JUCO ranks. Started 10 games, 22 appearances, and in those 2 starts in postseason play, 14 innings where he's given up 2 earned runs. It feels like Carson Dorsey, who Tennessee probably won't see but might see later on potentially, feels like he's pitching his best baseball right now.
Absolutely. What he did in the first game of the regional against Stetson was it was like awe-inspiring. He ends up battling through like this to get out of the 7th inning and just gets an absolute standing ovation, well-deserved, well-earned. And then he comes out for the 8th inning and somehow battles through the 8th inning and gets out of that alive and gets another standing ovation. Then they trot him back out there for the 9th inning. Eric, and it's like, what? I mean, I think he was touching close to he was maybe like over 130. And it's like, well, yeah, man, let him finish it out. And he got 2 outs in the 8th, but he couldn't get the last out. And then Connor Whitaker, Brendan Oxford came on to finish that game. But Carson Dorsey came here from the junior college, as you mentioned, and was kind of like, a setup guy. I mean, he was going to be maybe your midweek guy and somebody that would give you 2-3 innings in a weekend set to kind of close and fill in some gaps. But when Cam Leiter went down in late March, Jamie Arnold got elevated to Friday. Connor Whitaker, who was going to be their Sunday guy, their number 3 starter, started having some UCL issues. So Dorsey ends up finding himself as the number 2 pitcher for Florida State. And this was after he had a kind of a meltdown against Clemson. I mean, he surrendered back-to-back grand slams in 2 days out there against Clemson, where Florida State should have arguably won that series, and they ended up getting swept at the hands of Clemson. So what Dorsey did to kind of overcome that, and the way he's pitched in the postseason, he's just a freaking ferocious pit bull of a left-handed thrower, man. And he's got velocity on his pitches, but he just seems to dial in right now this part of the season. He's kind of maybe built for it. Just one of those unsung heroes that teams that make deep runs into June just have guys that kind of step up, and Dorsey's been that guy for them. That really wasn't in the mix for a starting role, but now he finds himself on the cusp of probably starting Sunday in Omaha, whether it's a loser's bracket or a 1-0 game.
Yeah, and with the off days, I mean, guys are going to get plenty of rest, so potentially Tennessee and FSU could meet again, just decide who could go on to the College World Series Finals. So maybe you see Dorsey down the line. Likely going to see some combination of Brendan Oxford, Joe Charles, Connor Holtz, all those guys, very often used bullpen arms. Got a lot of, I think it's Charles that leads the team in saves, or maybe it's Oxford. Yeah, it's Oxford leads the team in saves. What's the bullpen look like with those type of guys and more for FSU?
I mean, you're holding on. You're on the edge of your seat pretty much with anybody. I mean, Oxford might be a little bit more established, a little bit more confidence inspiring if you're a Florida State fan of late. Joe Charles came in against Louisville 2 months ago, no outs, bases loaded, and got out of that jam without allowing any runs to cross over. And you're thinking, all right, well, there's something here. But for whatever reason, it's just been so hit or miss with Joe Charles. Link Jarrett goes on and on about the stuff that Joe Charles throws, the rise that he gets on his fastball, but it seems to be so inconsistent for him. But he's fairly reliable for like 2 or 3 outs, or if he comes in for a righty-righty matchup. Like he's kind of figured out a role, if you will. Holtz is a freshman lefty that's done a really good job when it comes to wanting to match up lefty-lefty for Link, but he kind of had a rough go against UConn on Sunday, and it gives you a little bit of concern going into a game of the magnitude of Omaha. But right now, if anybody comes out of the bullpen that gives you a little bit more confidence than anybody else, it's going to be Brendan Oxford. And those are the 3 guys. A dark horse might be John Abraham. He's another true freshman. He's a righty that just throws nothing but breaking balls. I mean, he might mix in a fastball here and there, but it's curves, it's breaking balls, pitch after pitch. When he threw against Florida, it was funny on the SEC network. They were showing the game, and they were like lamenting his elbow. Like, I feel so bad for this kid. All he's being asked to do is just throw breaking pitches one after the other. But he's a righty that might come in if they need to get 3 outs to get a win out there in Omaha. So it's a limited bullpen, and no one really is going to be coming in there. And you kind of crack open a beer and think, all right, we're cruising home on this one. But I think that's indicative of pretty much everybody that's out there in Omaha right now. I think bullpen is the question mark for most every single team out there.
Yeah, I would agree. Talked a lot of pitching so far, but out the door, man, this lineup is, again, just like Virginia, just like Carolina, just like Tennessee, of course. This lineup is not too shabby. 123 homers on the year, a team batting average of .316. Looks like it starts with Cam Smith at the top, obviously hitting .402 through 254 at bats. He's a really, really good player. It looks like you got 5 guys over 10 home runs. James Tibbs, 28 home runs. That's only 4 behind Christian Moore. And, of course, you think Charlie Condon, you think Jack Caglione, Simo, and, I mean, Tibbs is right there at 28 home runs. Looks like a nice blend of power for sure, but majority of these guys in this everyday lineup, I mean, nobody's hitting under 276, maybe 263 there with Jackson West. Looks like a really balanced and well-rounded lineup as well.
Yeah, Link goes on and on about the athleticism they have at the plate, which I still haven't figured out how that translates at the plate, but he loves it for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, 1 through 5, it's tough to navigate. It's extremely tough to navigate. I am curious to see how it's going to work out with Tennessee, seeing as they kind of use openers and not necessarily traditional starters. But I mean, James Tibbs he's been kind of in a mini slump ever since the postseason started. If you want to count the ACC tournament, he didn't do a really great job in Charlotte. The first game against Stetson in the regional, I think he got walked 4 times. So it's hard to get too down on him, but the games against UCF, he didn't produce any hits. Game 1 against UConn didn't really do much. He might have had a hit or two, but that was a 24-4 onslaught. So it really wasn't like they depended on him. But that second game against UConn, the clincher, he had 2-run homers that helped clinch the game for them. So he's maybe busted out of that mini slump, if you will. So him and Cam Smith, that's just treacherous, man. You get righty lefty back to back. Max Williams leading things off is a guy that's got a pretty strong bat. And then right behind 2 and 3 with Cam Smith and James Tibbs is Marco Dinges, who's a young man who came from junior college, and Link Jarrett says has damage force intent when he's at the plate. And that's exactly, the kid just absolutely crushes the cover off the baseball. Behind him's Jaime Ferrer, who's been here for 3 years now and is swinging the bat as good as he ever has. Daniel Cantu has been hitting the 6 hole, and he's a first baseman transfer from USF. Big, strong dude with a good bat. So those first 6 guys, that's real legit talent and something that Tennessee is familiar with in terms of what they have. But behind them, Jackson West is kind of has figured out to be the starting catcher here of late. So he's maybe the weaker link. Alex Lodis and Drew Farrow, they're like the 2 wild cards. They can mess around and go 2 for 4, 3 for 4 each, but they could easily combine to go 0 for 8 in a loss. So that's kind of not the sexy sort of matchup to talk about, but I feel like 1 through 6 Florida State's going to produce. I feel like it's probably the same case for Tennessee. It might come down to how 7, 8, 9 bottom of your lineup is going to deliver in this one.
Yeah, with Tennessee, Cal Stark has given a whole lot of pop at that number 9 hole, spot in the order, the Tennessee's catcher. And, with Dean Curley hitting 7th, a true freshman, he's no slouch whatsoever. And whoever the designated hitter is of the day for Tennessee, it's literally different every single game, usually hitting there in the number 8 spot. Out the door, I do want to ask you about speed on the base pass. It looks like FSU doesn't run an awful lot, but when it does, it's primarily successful. You got a lot of 3 for 3s, 7 for 8s, 4 for 5s. Drew Farrat is a perfect 10 for 10 on the year, and of course you mentioned he's in the bottom third of the order. And then a role player in Jordan Williams who sees some action as, maybe that's his role. He's 15 of 16 stolen base attempts on the season. Tennessee doesn't throw out a lot of guys, but they do manage with how they manage the runners is they just throw over to first base so many times. And Cal Stark's a back pick machine. He's got 6 back picks at first base on the year. How's the running on the base pass for FSU?
It's not like a crucial part of their mix, Eric, but when games come down to it, late situations, like Ferrer's a guy that usually will get substituted out. They'll bring in a Diamez Ross like as a defensive sub, but really Ross comes in for his speed. Jordan Williams is a guy they've been using here recently in those kind of situations. That is probably one of the other things to watch. We know how big that freaking ballpark plays out there in Omaha. I don't know if it's TD Ameritrade or Charles Schwab. I don't know what we're calling it now, but Florida State's willingness, I think, to bunt and play small ball and manufacture runs, they are very comfortable doing that. They're very comfortable defending against it as well. Like Link is absolutely maniacal when it comes to stressing fundamentals in practice with those guys. So Florida State's they're not going to make that the overarching theme of how they want to get wins done out there in Omaha in terms of getting guys on base and trying to steal bases. They're opportunistic. They'll push in a tie game and they'll try to stretch things out to get some separation later on in the game, but it's not going to be something that I wouldn't assume they're going to come out firing on all cylinders to do. I mean, the two things I would look for X factor wise is if Florida State can get their bunt game going well, there's going to be a situation probably in a tight game I could see against Tennessee late in the game where they're going to try to push a game-tying run across or a game-winning run across doing that. And then defensively, how they're going to fare in the outfield. Those guys are all check plus bats, and they're good outfielders, Eric. They're not great outfielders. They are good outfielders. And will they be able to track down those gap shots that Tennessee is going to probably be able to figure out ways to get done out there in that huge ballpark? Can they limit that and not make the double a triple, not make the single a double? That's going to be kind of I think maybe the key that's going to come down to who's going to be able to get the best of each other on Friday.
It's going to be a good one. Opener for both these teams in the College World Series, Tennessee and Florida State. That's coming up at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. It'll be televised on ESPN and the family networks all week long at the College World Series. If you want more information on the Seminoles prior to the matchup, check out warchant.com over on 3 Network. Aslan Hajivandi, appreciate you taking the time, and maybe we'll see you down there in Omaha.
Thanks, Canner.
Really do appreciate Aslan Hajivandi for joining the show over to warchant.com to give us the skinny on Florida State. Going to be a big one coming up tonight. The winner plays on Sunday at 6 o'clock. The losers play on Sunday at 2 o'clock. And, of course, I'm talking about the 2 games, Tennessee, Florida State, the nightcap coming up later tonight. And at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, it is North Carolina and Virginia. Those are the 4 teams that make up bracket 1 for the Tennessee Volunteers. I'll be in Omaha all week long for as long as Tennessee's left standing. Hopefully it is an extended stay. And, of course, I'll bring you more of the recruiting coverage, recapping all that was on campus this past weekend on Rocky Top for a huge recruiting weekend. Appreciate you guys, as always, for making Locked On Vols your first listen, your first watch each and every single day. As always, you can watch us, listen to us, subscribe to us, download us wherever you get your podcasts for free, and of course on the Locked On Vols YouTube channel. If you're going to Omaha, try to find me, say hello. If you're going to watch the games, enjoy them on television, and enjoy your weekend overall, everybody. This is Locked On Vols.